His mind was full of dark thoughts, and the demon spoke to him. His wild eyes and words frightened his people, and he became an outcast, shunned by all. One day, in a fury of rage and pain, he attacked old Kanhikan, a local wise man. The demon-possessed man killed the venerable sage on the shores of a beautiful lake near his home, and then ran away, afraid of what the people would do to him when they found out. But the gods had seen the murder and were angry. They captured the demon-possessed man and transformed him into a terrible serpent as a punishment for the murder of the good Kanhikan. Then the serpent was cast into the lake, condemned forever to remain at the scene of his crime. The people living near the lake called the serpent Naha'ik, or lake demon. They would offer sacrifices to it before traveling upon its waters, but the offerings did not always appease the monster. Many times a fierce storm would fall upon the lake, and Naha'ik would rise from the roiling waters to claim a life. Once a man who was watering his horse at the lake saw the monster rise up from the depths and pull the poor animal under. And so the curse of Naha'ik continued to plague the residents of the lake. Then the white man came, and they scorned the tale of the lake demon. They began taking timber from the land nearby and floating the logs down to Lake Okanagan. One evening, as a local man worked on the raft of newly sewn logs, he chanced to look up and saw a long serpent with a horse-shaped head and a green, undulating body. It raised its head out of the water and stared deeply into the man's eyes. The man started shaking from head to toe and scrambled backwards toward shore. The demonic eyes of the giant creature gleamed with malevolence, and he scrambled up the bank and ran for his life. Not long after, a resident set off in a canoe with his horses roped behind, leading them across the lake. Suddenly, the horses began screaming and thrashing in the water and then disappeared underneath the waves. The canoe tipped backwards, and the man desperately pulled his knife and cut the ropes just in time to save himself from being dragged into the murky depths. The horses were never seen again. Thus was Naha'ik's first encounter by the white man at Lake Okanagan. The monster was seen many times through the years. Often it appeared like a long tree trunk or a floating log, but it would move against the current. Swimmers vanished, boats were attacked, and sometimes the monster would rise up from the waters and grab birds from midair. In 1942, the monster was rechristened Ogo Pogo, after a line in an old song. It has been seen many times and continues to haunt the waters of Lake Okanagan to this day.
Times 2 beans is 4 beans.
Nescafe uses lots more beans.
10 beans times 4 beans, and add 3 more beans, make 43 rich coffee beans.
Yes, you get 43 beans in every cup of Nescafe real coffee beans. That's all there is. In Nescafe, 43 beans in every cup. Make Nescafe the all coffee instant coffee. With the let's have another cup taste.
Extra beans means extra flavor. Today's Nescafe goes all the way for flavor with 43 choice beans in every cup.
When one of the local natives left his tribe to work with white lumbermen, he changed his name to William Cloud, and the lumberjacks started calling him Cloudy. They liked to hear Cloudy tell the story of the wraith that lived in the creek that powered the local log chute. The wraith was an evil creature that desired nothing more than to wrap its long arms around humans or animals and pull them down into the water to drown. It rained heavy and long that spring, and the creek was flooded almost to capacity. One stormy night, the order was given to lower the gate of the chute and send the logs downstream to the mill. The thought of going outside in the storm did not appeal to anyone, and so the men drew straws. Cloudy came up with the short one. He hugged his coat tightly around him as he made his way silently through the pitch-black night toward the log chute. As he released the first pin, he heard a foul hissing sound from beside the floating raft of logs. Cloudy turned his head and saw a grotesque form rising from the swirling stream. Its face was framed by wild weed-strewn hair, and dark slimy scales covered its loathsome body. Cloudy tugged frantically at the final pin, eager to finish his task and get away, but the pin got stuck halfway out. Suddenly the creature lunged out of the water. Cloudy leapt back, fleeing up the path toward the cabin. Behind him, the wraith howled. Cloudy increased his speed, running blindly in the darkness. Then the wraith dropped down from the branches of a tree right in front of him, blocking his way. Its yellow eyes glowed, and the moonlight glinted against its slimy skin. Its long, thin arms stretched out toward him through the raging storm, claws extended. He gave one loud shout of despair, but the lightning-fast movement of the razor-sharp claw cut off his cry, and the woods were suddenly still again. Back in the cabin, the lumberman waited for Cloudy to return. Then Ethan, Cloudy's good friend, volunteered to go down to the log chute and look for him. Several other loggers decided to join the search. Within 10 minutes, the men were standing next to the gate. They lowered a lantern to the level of the rushing water and peered into the depths. Ethan gave a sudden sharp cry when he spotted the mangled face of Cloudy. The loggers lifted the gate and drew Cloudy up with pike poles. His body had been sliced to ribbons, and his head was almost completely severed. News of the murderous wraith in the creek quickly spread through the lumber camp. A week after Cloudy's death, Ethan was awakened by a strange blue light above his bed. He opened his eyes and found himself gazing into the face of William Cloud. The spirit warned Ethan that the wraith had marked Ethan for its next victim. At daybreak, Ethan packed his belongings and left the camp. On his way out, he confided his story to a few of the lumbermen, and soon word of Cloudy's warning spread throughout the camp. By sundown, it was completely deserted. The log chute fell into disrepair and slowly crumbled away, never to be replaced. The wraith still lurks in the stream, watching for another victim. But it waits in vain, for the ghost of Cloudy appears to anyone foolish enough to wander near the stream, warning them away with terrible groans and piercing screams. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. There were warnings all over campus about a hatchet man who supposedly abused and killed a woman in the town. All the girls were warned to walk in pairs and to stay in brightly lit areas if they had to go out at night. The sophomore and her roommate were staying in an empty dorm over Thanksgiving break, since both their families were out of the country. They grew very bored as day followed boring day and night followed boring night. Tired of staying inside every night for fear of the hatchet man, her roommate suggested they have dinner at the local bar, and the sophomore agreed. The two women had lingered longer than anticipated, and it was almost midnight when the sophomore, more than a little drunk, decided to walk back to the dorm. Her roommate was busy flirting with the bartender, so she headed into the dark, silent streets alone. The sophomore had forgotten all about the hatchet man warnings. It wasn't until she took a shortcut through the dark, creepy alley that she remembered there was a desperate murderer on the loose. The sophomore shivered, feeling suddenly sober and very much alone. She felt as if hostile eyes were peering out at her from every menacing shadow and darkened doorway. She quickened her pace. Was that heavy breathing she heard behind her? Were those footsteps walking in time with her own? The sophomore broke into a run, heart pounding fiercely, sure that someone was following her. She darted onto the college campus, zigzagged through the buildings, and flung herself, panting, into the dorm. She pounded up 3 flights of stairs, down the hall, and slammed into her room, locking the door behind her. It was only then, leaning against the door with her heart racing, that she started to feel foolish. There was no sound from the hallway, no footsteps, no heavy breathing, no hatchet breaking through the wood of the door. She'd been a fool. The sophomore staggered to the bathroom to wash up for the night, leaving the door locked behind her. She kept glancing in the mirror to make sure that everything was secure. The scene in the mirror was normal, and there was no sound in the empty dormitory. Everything was just fine, she told herself. Then she remembered that her roommate was still at the bar. She didn't want her roommate to walk home alone, so she called the bar and asked the manager if he would arrange for her roommate to be brought home in a taxi. The music in the background was loud, and she wasn't sure if the manager understood her request. But at least she tried. The sophomore curled up in bed with the reading lamp on, determined to wait up for her roommate. But the combination of heavy drinking and her earlier fright sent her into a deep sleep almost at once, and she did not awaken until the sun came pouring in the window early next morning. She woke with a hangover and rolled over, trying not to be sick in the bed. When she looked across the room, she realized that her roommate wasn't in the bed on the far wall. In fact, it looked as if her bed had not been slept in at all. She rolled to her feet, heart pounding with dread. Maybe her roommate had spent the night in the lobby. Her roommate had done that once before when out partying until the wee hours of the morning, saying it was too much trouble to climb 3 flights of stairs. With trembling hands, the sophomore unlocked the door and wrenched it open in search of her roommate. The unmistakable, faintly metallic scent of blood smashed into her nostrils as the door swung open. That was her only warning before her shocked eyes saw blood splattered all over the walls and floor of the 3rd floor hallway. She screamed in terror, leaping backward away from the partially decapitated body of her roommate, which lay dead at her feet. Her throat was slit from end to end and blood pooled under her dead body. The nails on her outstretched hand were torn and splintered where they had scratched desperately at the wooden door. A black shadow lay across her roommate's body. She looked up in a daze, her gaze following the black shadow to its source. Embedded in the window frame near the entrance to the staircase was a blood-stained hatchet, outlined in the light of the rising sun.
Yo-ho, yo-ho,
brush, let's or lather, boys, whichever you've the notion.
50 cents for shaving cream, $1 for the lotion.
Old Spice means quality, said the captain to the bosun. So look for the package with the ship that sails the ocean. Yo-ho, 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 yo-ho.
I've had this reoccurring nightmare since I was 7. It's about this thing that lives in the mirrors in my room, but it seems to follow me to other places because I had the same nightmare when I went away to college. It started simply enough. One night, I woke up and looked over into the mirror hanging on my door, and I could see this thing hunched over me, looking into the mirror and smiling. It had green, yellow eyes, dark, scraggly long hair, and entirely too many teeth. I guess at that point I woke up for real and turned on the TV in my bedroom, and it just went away. My mom took the mirror down the next day for me. Nothing happened again until my senior year of college. I had a room where I had my own bathroom, and my bed was right across from it. You could see into the mirror from my bed. There was also an old mirror hanging on the door leading to the hallway of my dorm building. From my bed, you could see a little table and chair set that I had set up. Well, first night I'm there, I wake up, and there the thing is again, lying in bed with me, but staring into the mirror and smiling at me. I freaked out and turned on my television to get some light in my room, and it was gone. I got out of bed, closed the door, and slept fairly well the rest of the night. Next night, the same thing happens. I wake up, and I look around, and my eyes settle on the mirror on the door leading out of my room. It's there again. It's smiling at me with a mouth full of too many sharp teeth. And then it stands up and walks out of the view of the mirror toward my bed. Toward me! I freak the hell out. I turned to cover the mirror with printer paper and tape, and did not get much sleep at all. The next night, my friend invited me over to their place. I went over around 8 and fell asleep pretty early because I was exhausted. Well, you guessed it. I woke up and noticed a mirror next to the ladder leading up to my friend's bed, and the thing started climbing up to the bed beside me. I panicked and woke my friend up. I told her that I was leaving. From that point, I've made it a habit to cover mirrors with paper or scarves or whatever I can find. The weirdest thing is that sometimes when I talk about the thing, whatever I have covering the mirror will randomly fall off. I try to rationalize it as pure coincidence, but sometimes I'm not so sure.
Spit my life one
I ran madly in what seemed like a hailstorm of rifle fire. I darted and dashed wildly as bullets whistled past my ears. It seems almost whimsical now, but even in those short moments of madness, the darkness which had come only days earlier was by far the more pressing. In the breast pocket of my field jacket, I carried the amulet of Camelkir. This was, I knew, the prize sought by my would-be assailants. I did not then know, however, that they were willing to kill me in order to contain the horror that I had unwittingly unleashed. It was a time of secrets, a time of lies, of measures and countermeasures, and it was a time of monsters. Through a series of cryptic clues, I had discovered the amulet installed in an obscure alcove adjoined to what I took to be a hidden burial chamber near, well, perhaps I should not say. Once removed from the alcove, I felt a distressing chill, followed by a subtle rumbling. Out of the shadows came the figure of a thing so hideous, so monstrous, that for a moment I was frozen. The thing approached me and released a series of wails and screams until the ground beneath my feet shook. I wielded my knife, struck once, slashing the creature before turning to seek escape. Then the rocks began to fall. I had only moments before I would be trapped inside with the thing. And if so, I would never see another day. But I did escape. The rocks and the horrible Ikimu, a vampiric horror first spoken of by the Babylonians. Though alive, I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. It was for this reason that after rejoining my companions, we became foxes in the hunt. We were able to get away and across the border. I've often thought of that time, the adventure, the danger, but most of all, of the terrible, terrible evil that was once again set loose upon the world.
No matter what your favorite entertainment is, you'll always find it on the Maxwell House Showboat. The ticket of admission, as always, just your loyalty to Maxwell House Coffee. Tonight, guests of the Showboat, I'd like to put on a little scene concerning something we've been talking about ever since hot weather began. The friendly stimulation of a tall, tinkling glass of iced Maxwell House coffee. As our curtain rises, we see a golfer step inside his front door at home. His wife calls to him.
Well, dear, how was your game? Pretty hot day, wasn't it?
Hot is right. And the game just so-so as usual. Oh, goodness, Mary, I feel all in. Tired. Those last two holes took everything I had. Even the shower didn't seem to help much. Guess I'll just sit down in the easy chair and rest a bit.
I thought you'd be feeling kind of low and played out, dear. So I'm repeating the wholesome little ceremony you liked so much last week.
Yeah? What's that?
The most refreshing drink there is. It'll buoy you up all right. And afterwards, I'm sure you'll feel that your exercise was well worthwhile. Here you are.
Iced Maxwell House coffee, huh? I tell you, Mary, this certainly does hit the spot. Certain? And ladies and gentlemen, in golf and tennis clubs, around swimming pools, in the locker rooms at the baseball parks, at the beaches, wherever people are active this summer, you'll find a growing custom. People are drinking iced Maxwell House coffee, and you'll enjoy it too whenever you need refreshment. A cooling drink of iced Maxwell House coffee with its friendly stimulation that buoys you up and never lets you down.
The story begins with a priest from a thriving village in Ireland who was traveling to a nearby town on business for his church. The priest's journey across the countryside was long and arduous, and as night grew near, he was forced to set up camp near a dark forest that was reputed to be haunted. During the night, the priest heard a clawing and scratching outside his tent. When he went outside to investigate, he was attacked by a wolf. He was bitten severely, and just as he thought the wolf was about to finish him off, the cross around his neck was exposed. The wolf suddenly ceased its attack and merely stood over him, staring into his eyes. Then, Inexplicably, it ran off and left him lying on the ground, bleeding badly from his wounds. The next day, he managed to crawl back to his village, where he was discovered by the local doctor. With good medical care, his wounds soon healed, and he was back to work in no time. The priest was re-energized and tackled his preaching duties with renewed vigor. He inspired the villagers and helped them to build a new church. The faith of his parishioners was strengthened, and every day his church was packed with worshipers. But there were still some problems in the village. Every full moon, someone in the village was found dead or went missing under mysterious circumstances. People said that they had seen a creature stalking through the village at night. A creature that walked like a man, but whose body was covered in fur and bore the head of a wolf. There was talk of a curse on the village, and many believed that a werewolf was stalking them and picking them off one by one. The priest began to wonder why God had cursed his village with these horrible murders. It seemed as if there was no end to the death and destruction. One night during a full moon, the villagers decided that they had to catch and kill the werewolf that was plaguing their village once and for all. They set a trap by tying the most beautiful girl in the village to a tree, using her as bait to lure the werewolf. High above in the branches of the tree, they rigged up a trap to catch the wolf. Then they hid in the bushes and lay in wait for their prey. Soon they heard a crashing sound coming through the forest, and suddenly the werewolf appeared in the clearing. As it made its way towards the terrified young girl, the villagers cut the ropes that were tied to the tree, and a huge cage crashed down on top of the wolf, trapping him behind its heavy iron bars. The jubilant villagers rushed out from their hiding places and drove long spears into the body of the werewolf, piercing its heart. As the monster collapsed on the floor of the cage, the people watched his hairy body ripple and change. Gradually, the creature changed from wolf to man as the life ebbed from his body. The villagers fell to their knees and began to weep as they realized that they had killed their beloved priest. A few years ago, one night around 3 a.m., my wife and I were sleeping, and I felt myself slowly waking up from a really deep sleep. My eyes started lifting up, and as soon as they focused on the lamp on my dresser, it slid off and shattered on the floor. My wife and I quickly sat up and looked at each other, horrified at the startling noise. We agreed we would clean it in the morning and went back to sleep. The next morning when we woke up, the lamp was at the foot of the bed, about 5 feet from where it fell, completely intact and not broken at all. We're still trying to make sense of it. An investigative shamanic group from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, the Oglala Lakota in South Dakota, was called in to investigate and bless a home. The incidents began when two sisters observed a black-eyed boy outside the home. Not long later, a group of ashen white-skinned children with black eyes were seen congregating around the property in an attempt to interact with the other children living there. The first two occasions, there were only two of them, and they asked to be let inside the house to get food. The third time, a third one showed up, and this time they asked for blood. They were never granted access to the house. The children described their voice as not normal, robotic, and monotone. Pets also went missing around this time around the property. The parents of the children recall seeing these spooky children too. They also claimed to have noticed strange events around their home, including poltergeist activity and the sighting of, on at least 2 occasions, strange entities that they later thought to be alien. You're listening to Darkfall Anthology 3, exclusively on Blackwater Media. In the early 90s, I was with the teams in the Navy. We were sanctioned by an alphabet government agency to put a stop to several aggressive Sasquatch in the high country in western North Carolina. We all thought it was a joke at the mission briefing, but it was no joke. My partner in our team of 12 was my swim buddy. He was Native American. This man wasn't scared of anything. Before we were ordered to go out during the briefing, all of these agents were showing us slides of what these creatures did to people, adults and children alike, as well as the damage done to vehicles and homes. Anyway, my buddy turned white with sheer fear. He told me, "This is bad, really bad." When we arrived in the little mountain village town, the sheriff met us. He told us he'd never been so happy to see the cavalry since he'd been in Korea. He showed us the actual places where, as he put it, "This is where those fuckers, those big hairy demons destroyed this or killed him, her, or them there." My buddy was taking everything in like I never saw him before. After talking with the sheriff, our lieutenant told us to fire up because we were going hunting. As we were getting our gear ready, my buddy said to me, "You know, I always thought my grandfather was just telling me scary stories about he and his brothers when they fought these wild men." We started in around 1400. By 1600, we found lots and lots of tracks. We started tracking them. We made out at least 7 different individuals. We made first contact at around 1930, and it was almost dark. The point man stopped dead in his tracks and spoke in his headset. "I see one, and it's fucking huge." The lieutenant said, "If you have a shot, take it." He shot this massive hairy beast with a 7.62 millimeter round, and it acted like a mosquito bit him. The creature turned around and let out a god-awful roar. The point man quickly switched to full auto. This time the creature dropped like a rock after 10 7.62 millimeter rounds cut up his chest. After first contact, the agents radioed in and said they wanted one alive. Our lieutenant told them to go screw themselves. It took 3 days and nights with almost no sleep, but we dropped 7 hairy bastards. We found the missing people, or rather what was left of them. We had one casualty when a team member was snatched straight up into the goddamn trees. There was nothing anyone could have done for him. To this day, thinking of those 3 days sends chills down my spine. You won't find those 3 days in any military record or mission log. Going into our mission debriefing, where normally we were asked 1,001 questions about every shot fired, every angle we fired from, every angle we fired on, etc., we were simply told that the past 3 days we were doing rigorous mountain training, and during that training period, we lost a man. And with that, the debriefing team stood up and walked out. Now, normally we have individual debriefing for the whole team, but this was the only time it was just team debriefing. So to answer your next question, after 3 days, government agents came in and removed all 7 corpses and flew them out. My message to everyone: don't let anyone tell you that these things don't exist. They do. They're real. They're horrible. And they are the deadliest goddamn things I have ever seen. This is the first time I'm actually sharing this experience with anyone, and it's taken me quite a while to be able to tell it, because ever since it happened, I haven't been the same. I don't sleep as well, have constant nightmares, have been generally getting more ill and just being traumatized. My brother as well, with whom it occurred. Last summer, in July, I was visiting my brother, who happens to live in northern Michigan in a town called Rapid City. The place itself is pretty close to the Traverse State Forest area, in which a long road runs through it called Supply Road. This road has thick forests and brush on both sides with occasional farms. We'd gone down south to Fife Lake, which is only about a 30-minute drive from where he lived. He wanted to show me around the area and the lake itself and have some fun with photography. It was about 9 p.m. when we finally decided to call it a day, and it was pretty dark at this point. On the way back, we were both like, fuck it, let's drive through the Traverse State Forest area for a more scenic route, even though it's out of the way. We both love the woods and going through scenic routes, and I love getting to see new parts of Michigan. As we pulled onto Supply Road, it didn't seem more than 7 or so minutes before we had our experience with whatever the hell it was we saw. Going north on this road, on the left side, is about 10 or so feet of clearing with just dirt and grass before it hits thick brush and trees. It was a little after 9 p.m. at this point, and as we were driving, I'm in the passenger seat, I noticed this large, black-like dog on the side of the road. But something wasn't right. It looked like it was crouched down as a human being would, waiting to jump out or something. It wasn't looking over in our direction, but you could tell its head was absolutely canine-like. As we got closer and the lights actually started to shine on it, It immediately turned its head towards us and stood up as it made this horrible hissing-like sound. I don't know how else to describe it. Both my brother and I turned sheet white at this point. It slammed on our brakes. About 30 feet away from us on the side of the road standing was this, I don't even know what to call it. I want to say werewolf because that's the only thing that really described what it looked like. But then maybe it was a skinwalker. I don't know. This beast had piercing, sharp yellow eyes that for some reason didn't reflect at all when the light hit them. But they almost seemed to glow on their own, which was creepy in and of itself. The thing had a longer snout and very sharp pointed ears and was massively tall. When it hissed at us, you could see how sharp its massive teeth were and how fast it stood up and scared us both as we had startled this thing. The thing honestly looked like something out of a goddamn horror movie, and if CGI actually looked real. We had our windows rolled down all the way home, and we smelled what I can only describe as a mix of garbage, decaying flesh, and wet dog together. We didn't really smell it until after it stood up and we had slammed on our brakes. This damn thing was about 8 or 9 feet tall, I would say, and had a humongous bill. Not bulky per se, but it was big and extremely lean. It looked like an extremely masculine and lean human male body, although I didn't see any genitalia. This thing was very shaggy and hairy, with finger-like claws, like pretty much you'd see in a typical werewolf movie. I didn't get a chance to stare at the feet or anything, as I was motionless staring at this thing. We only got to stare at it for what seemed like a few seconds before it let out this horrible scream that shook me and my brother to the core. It immediately started to pace towards our truck aggressively with its claws baring and teeth baring as if it were extremely aggressive and ready to kill me and my brother. We screamed at the top of our lungs and floored it as hard as we could. He literally sped all the way home, and we didn't say a word the rest of the way. We didn't sleep at all that night, and I haven't been the same person ever since. What I saw that night truly terrified me so badly, and I'm sharing this with people because I hope they can educate themselves and know what's out there, or that it will help someone speak up and share their experience and not worry about ridicule. The storm lasted so long that they thought they would starve. Finally, when the wind and swirling snow had died away to just a memory, the father, who was a brave warrior, ventured outside. The next storm was already on the horizon, but if food was not found soon, the family would starve. Keeping his knife and spear close, he ventured out upon the most frequently used game trail, watching intently for some sign in the newly fallen snow of animal footprints or movement of any kind. The forest lay deep and oddly silent under its gleaming coating of ice and snow. Every creature of sense lay deep within its burrow and slept. Still, the warrior hunted, knowing how desperate his family had become. As he moved through the eerie stillness, broken only by the soft caress of the wind, he heard a strange hissing noise. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The warrior stopped, his heart pounding. That was when he saw the blood-soaked footprints appearing on the path in front of him. He gripped his knife tightly, knowing that somewhere, watching him, was a Wendigo. He had learned about the Wendigo at his father's knee. It was a large creature as tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory. And those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. The warrior knew he'd just have one chance to prevail over the Wendigo. After that, he would die, or the thought was too terrible to contemplate. Slowly, he backed away from the bloody footprints, listening to the hissing sound. Was it stronger in one direction? He gripped his spear in one hand and his knife in the other. Then the snowbank to his left erupted as the creature as tall as a tree leapt out at him. He dove to one side, rolling into the snow so that his clothing was covered, and he became hard to see in the gray twilight of the approaching storm. The Wendigo whirled its massive frame, and the warrior threw the spear. It struck the creature's chest, but the Wendigo just shook it off as if it were a toy. The warrior crouched behind a small tree as the creature searched the torn-up snow for a trace of him. Perhaps one more chance. The Wendigo loomed over his hiding place, its sharp eyes seeing the outline of him against the tree. It bent down, long arms reaching. The warrior leapt forward as if to embrace the creature and thrust his knife into the fathomless black eye. The Wendigo howled in pain as the blade of the knife sliced into its brain cavity. It tried to pull him off its chest, but the warrior clung to the creature, stabbing it again and again in the eyes and the head. The Wendigo collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely, almost crushing the warrior beneath its bulk. He pulled himself loose and stared at the creature, which blended in with its white surroundings so well that he would not have even seen it save for the blood pouring from its eyes and ears and scalp. Then the outline of the creature grew misty, and it vanished, leaving only a pool of blood to indicate where it had fallen. Shaken, the warrior, heart pounding with fear and fatigue, turned for home. He was weakened by lack of food, but knew that the storm would break soon and he would die if he did not seek shelter. At the edge of the wood, he found himself face to face with a red fox. It was a fat old creature, its muzzle lined with gray. The creature stood still, as if it had been brought to him as a reward for killing the Wendigo. With a prayer of thanksgiving, the warrior killed the fox and took it home to his starving family. The meat lasted for many days until the final storm had blown itself out and the warrior could safely hunt once more. She lived deep in the forest in a tiny cottage and sold herbal remedies for a living. Folks living in the town nearby called her Bloody Mary and said she was a witch. None dared cross the old crone for fear that their cows would go dry, their food stores rot away before winter, their children take sick of fever, or any number of terrible things that an angry witch could do to her neighbors. Then the little girls in the village began to disappear, one by one. No one could find out where they'd gone. Grief-stricken families searched the woods, the local buildings, and all the houses and barns, but there were no sign of the missing girls. A few brave souls even went to Bloody Mary's home in the woods to see if the witch had taken the girls, but she denied any knowledge of the disappearances. Still, it was noted that her haggard appearance had changed. She looked younger, more attractive. The neighbors were suspicious, but they could find no proof that the witch had taken their young ones. Then came the night when the daughter of the miller rose from her bed and walked outside, following an enchanted sound no one else could hear. The miller's wife had a toothache and was sitting up in the kitchen treating the tooth with an herbal remedy when her daughter left the house. She screamed for her husband and followed the girl out of the door. The miller came running in his nightshirt. Together, they tried to restrain the girl, but she kept breaking away from them and heading out of town. The desperate cries of the miller and his wife woke the neighbors. They came to assist the frantic couple. Suddenly, a sharp-eyed farmer gave a shout and pointed towards the strange light at the edge of the woods. A few townsmen followed him out into the field and saw Bloody Mary standing beside a large oak tree, holding a magic wand that was pointed towards the miller's house. She was glowing with an unearthly light as she set her evil spell upon the miller's daughter. The townsmen grabbed their guns and their pitchforks and ran towards the witch. When she heard the commotion, Bloody Mary broke off her spell and fled back into the woods. The far-sighted farmer had loaded his gun with silver bullets in case the witch ever came after his daughter. Now he took aim and shot at her. A bullet hit Bloody Mary in the hip and she fell to the ground. The angry townsmen leapt upon her and carried her back into the field where they built a huge bonfire and burned her at the stake. As she burned, Bloody Mary screamed a curse at the villagers. If anyone mentioned her name aloud before a mirror, she would send her spirit to revenge herself upon them for her terrible death. When she was dead, the villagers went to the house in the wood and found the unmarked graves of the little girls the evil witch had murdered. She had used their blood to make her young again. From that day to this, anyone foolish enough to chant Bloody Mary's name 3 times before a darkened mirror will summon the vengeful spirit of the witch. It is said that she will tear their bodies to pieces and rip their souls from their mutilated bodies. The souls of these unfortunate ones will burn in torment as Bloody Mary once burned, and they will be trapped forever in the mirror. I lived alone in a remote location in Montana. We didn't have cable, so the only option was satellite TV. It was a humid summer night in July, and the TV was acting up, so as usual, I needed to go out and readjust the satellite. I took a flashlight and a gun with me. When I went outside, it was usually quiet. But this time it was a little different. It was quiet, yes, but more quiet than usual, like so silent it was unnerving. I brushed the thought off and went to the dish, which was in the corner of my yard. I went to work, making sure all the wires were all right and pointing it to a different angle. Suddenly I heard a small snap of a stick to my left and turned the flashlight to the direction, and I saw a creature standing there. I got a good look at it for what seemed like an eternity, but it was only about 10 seconds. I slowly backed off and ran back to the house and locked all the doors and windows. The creature was unlike anything I've ever seen before. When I shined the light at it, the first thing I saw was the head. It had cropped ears that pointed upwards. Its snout was narrower than a bear's and longer, and I could make out large teeth protruding from the jaw. Its eyes were a deep red shade that seemed to reflect off the light I was pointing at it. The body was muscular and huge. It had long arms that appeared to be longer than its legs, broad shoulders that tapered into a skinnier waist. It was slightly crouched over when I saw it, with one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could make out the legs, which looked similar to a dog's legs. It had obvious hocks. Even with the crouched position, it was about my height, which is 6 feet. Standing up to full height, this creature could easily be 7.5 feet tall. The fur was black and thicker around the neck and chest, and the bottom half significantly less so. I didn't know if it was aggressive or not, but that hardly seemed the point at the time. What I know is I had a feeling of dread unlike anything I've ever experienced. Was it just observing me or stalking me? For a creature this large, it was deceivingly silent. It got within 15 yards of me without me noticing. All I knew was I needed to get the hell out of there and not find out. I don't live on the property anymore, but after the event, I never had another face-to-face encounter. But I would hear sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. They would start off relatively quiet and work their way up to a furious howl or scream, then back down to quiet again. It terrifies me to know that these things are out there lurking in the woods and forested areas. I know that there's lots of people who either aren't sure or maybe even doubt if these creatures are real. They are. I don't know how, and I damn sure don't know why. So the next time you're out in any wilderness area, hunting, camping, fishing, hiking, or whatever, remember what I've told you. Remember, and be careful.